Oh, relax, it's just a wall. Honestly, it's an improvement. Maybe you people should be thanking him. That's what Priscilla Thorne screamed across the cul-de-sac 2 in the afternoon, a dozen neighbors on their porches, while her grown son stood at my brick wall, an industrial paint sprayer roaring in his fist, dragging a slur across it in wet, dripping orange. I stood 10 feet away, not moving, one hand in my jacket thumb on the cold metal of a badge nobody could see yet, and 22 years on the job teaches you one thing: let a guilty man keep painting. So Priscilla marched right up, planted a finger in my chest, and shoved.
Are you deaf? Take it up with the board, sweetheart.
I looked down at her finger, then up at her son.
Ma'am, I'll stop him. But he's doing such a thorough job on the evidence.
She laughed. Her son didn't, because he'd finally seen my other hand come out of my pocket. But to understand why a grown man was spray painting my wall at 2 in the afternoon, while his mother cheered him on, you need to know how we got here. My name's Everett Blackwood. 22 years carrying a badge, the last 9 running the county's Financial and Property Crimes Unit, which is a polite way of saying I read other people's paperwork until it confesses. My wife Simone teaches high school chemistry, which becomes relevant later in a way that still makes me grin. We'd bought the place on Wren Court the spring before. First house with a yard big enough for a dog. The morning we closed, I stood on the porch with a coffee gone cold in my hand and just breathed it in. Fresh cut grass drifting off somebody's lawn. That green, almost sweet smell that makes you feel like you've finally arrived somewhere. Simone squeezed my arm. Blue-collar kid from 2 counties over, and here I was with a mailbox that matched the shutters. I should have known the mailbox would be the problem. Cedar Hollow Estates has a homeowners association. And Cedar Hollow's HOA had Priscilla Thorne. Picture the energy of a woman who measures her neighbor's grass with an actual ruler and calls it a public service. 11 years as president unopposed, because running against Priscilla was like volunteering to be audited by someone who hates you. My welcome came taped to the door on day 9. A violation notice flapping in the wind like a little paper insult. My brick garden wall and the cedar fence behind it, the ones that came with the house, that stood there before I signed a single document, were apparently non-compliant with Community Aesthetic Standards Section 4. Fine $200. Payable to the HOA. Now I've read a lot of documents in my life. So I did the boring thing. I pulled my closing packet and found the architectural approval on that exact wall, signed off by that exact HOA 2 owner's back. Grandfathered. Legal. Untouchable. A pre-existing feature the prior board already approved usually can't be fined later. Always check your closing documents first. So I walked the notice down to Priscilla's polite as Sunday printout in hand. Down the block, a landscaping truck idled at the curb, and the diesel drifted over warm and heavy, mixing with somebody's mulch. Gravel crunched under my shoes. She answered the door in a robe the color of a highlighter coffee, and one hand phone in the other. I explained. Calm, friendly. I even said ma'am. She looked at my paperwork the way you'd look at an expired coupon. Anyone can print something off the internet, she said. And she shut the door. Not slammed gently, which is somehow worse. The soft click of a woman who has never once lost. I paid the $200. On purpose. I wanted her comfortable. Because a comfortable opponent gets sloppy, and sloppy people leave a trail. What I didn't count on was the son. Brantley Thorne was 25 going on 14. A gray Charger, a chip on his shoulder the size of the clubhouse, and a mother who'd spent his whole life teaching him that consequences were for other people. Over the next 2 weeks, the fines kept coming. My trash cans were visible. My truck was commercial because it had a toolbox in the bed. My hydrangeas were the wrong varietal for the community palate, which I didn't know was a sentence a person could write down. And every time I paid, smiled, and filed the receipt, I watched Priscilla get bolder and her son get braver. He'd rev that Charger past my house at midnight. He'd flick cigarette butts onto my lawn from the curb and grin at me like he was daring me to say something. Simone told me to let it go. I told her I was letting it build. Right up until the afternoon, he decided a paint sprayer and my brick wall would make the point his mother's paperwork couldn't. Which brings us back to the driveway. and that badge in my pocket. Here's the part nobody warns you about. I thought the badge coming out of my pocket ended it. It didn't. It started the real fight. Because Priscilla Thorne didn't see a detective standing on my lawn, she saw a problem she'd been handling her entire life, a nuisance she could paperwork into the ground. Her son wiped orange paint off his hands onto his jeans, climbed into the Charger, and drove off like he'd just mowed a lawn. And Priscilla, she looked at the slur dripping down my brick, looked at 12 neighbors pretending to water plants that didn't need it, and said loud enough to carry, well, maybe if certain people kept their property up to standard, they wouldn't attract this kind of thing. She was blaming the wall. She was blaming me. And underneath it, thin as primer under fresh paint, she was telling everyone on that street exactly what she thought about who belonged on Wren Court. Most people, this is where the blood pressure spikes, where you yell or cry or start knocking on doors. And believe me, 22 years on the job does not make you immune. My jaw was tight enough to crack a walnut. The paint fumes were still sharp in the warm afternoon air, chemical and mean. And my dog was sneezing at the fence line like she wanted no part of it. But I've stood over a lot of scenes. And a scene talks to you if you let it. So I didn't chase the Charger. I put the dog inside and I worked it. I photographed everything. Wide, medium, tight, every frame time-stamped. The orange was a cheap hardware store fluorescent. The strokes were high, lazy, right-handed, done by somebody tall and completely unafraid of getting caught, which told me he'd done it before, which told me he lived close. Then I did the second boring thing that wins cases. I called it in and filed an actual police report, not because I expected the responding officer to crack the case of the century, but because a case number is a fact, and facts stack. Report vandalism officially, even when you already know who did it. The case number is what makes it real to a court, an insurer, and eventually an HOA board. The young patrol officer who took my statement kept glancing at me, like he couldn't figure out why the victim was calmer than he was. I didn't tell him what I did for a living. Some cards you hold. That's when the door knocking taught me the real shape of this neighborhood. I walked the block not to accuse anybody, just to ask what they'd seen. And one after another in broad daylight, my neighbors caught a sudden contagious case of amnesia. The Hendersons, who'd been standing on their porch when it happened, decided they'd been inside the whole time. The Dunbars remembered hearing something maybe. One woman actually watered the same hanging basket the entire time she talked to me. I swear that fern is at the bottom of a pond somewhere now, and told me she didn't want to get involved in neighbor stuff. Every single one of them glanced down the street toward Priscilla's house while they said it. Quick little flicks of the eyes, like a kid checking whether the teacher's watching. That's when I understood. It wasn't that they didn't see. It was that they were afraid. Priscilla had spent 11 years teaching this cul-de-sac that the safest thing you can be is blind. Only one door gave me the truth, and it came over my own back fence that evening. You want the Thorne boy, Brantley. It was Gus Halloran, retired 2 doors down, the kind of old-timer who's outside at every hour because sleep and him broke up years ago. Suspenders, reading glasses on a chain, hands like tree roots. He nodded at my ruined wall, and the porch light caught a grin that was not friendly. It was the grin of a man who'd been waiting 11 years for somebody to finally do something. Priscilla's boy, Gus said. Gray Charger. And son, you are not the first wall he's decorated. You're just the first one dumb enough to fight it. He paused, and the reading glasses swung on their chain. Well, brave enough. I always mix those two up. I asked if he'd seen it happen. Saw the whole thing from my porch. So did the Hendersons, the Dunbars, half the block. And every one of them just told you they didn't, am I right? He didn't wait for the answer. That's how she runs this place. Fear dressed up as bylaws. You cross Priscilla, your fines triple, your pool key stops working, and suddenly there's a lien on your house you can't sell around. He spat into the grass. I've watched good people fold for 11 years. My wife, God rest her, used to say somebody ought to teach that woman what a boomerang is. I looked at the slur on my wall, drying now permanent, and I felt something cold and clean settle in my chest, the feeling I get right before a case cracks open. Then I guess, I said, I'll have to give this block a reason to remember they've got eyes. Gus laughed low and delighted. What have you got in mind? Right now, I said. Paperwork, but the fun kind. He had no idea. Neither did Priscilla. And neither, honestly, for a few more days, did I. For 4 days, nothing. I want you to understand how important the nothing was. A lesser plan swings back immediately. Mine wasn't a plan, yet it was a case number, a witness, and a wall I refused to repaint, sitting quiet in the sun like bait nobody had noticed yet. Then Brantley got bored. Saturday morning, I came out to grab the trash cans, and there it was, a long silver gash keyed down the driver's door of my truck, curling around the wheel well like a signature. And not just mine. The Hendersons' minivan across the street, the Dunbar's sedan, the Okonkwo's SUV 3 doors down. Somebody had walked the whole block in the dark with a key held out like a claw. The morning smelled like dew and somebody's bacon, ordinary and bright, and none of it registered. I just stood there listening to my own pulse and doing math. Because a keyed truck is a nuisance, but a keyed block, that's a pattern. That's felony range property damage aggregated across multiple households. That's the kind of thing that stops being kids and becomes a case with a capital C. I photographed all of it. Then I did the door knock again, and Gus was right. 3 of the 4 neighbors developed instant amnesia. Probably just teenagers. I really don't want any trouble with the board. The Hendersons practically shut the door in my face, eyes flicking down the street toward Priscilla's, like she might be listening through the vinyl siding. Fear dressed up as neighborly caution. Only the Okonkwos told the truth. Chidi Okonkwo stood on his porch, arms crossed, and said quietly, "It was the Thorn boy. My daughter saw the car from her window. But if I put that in writing, Priscilla will bury us in fines. She already charged us $600 for the wheelchair ramp we built for Ada." His jaw flexed. A ramp a child needs to get into her own home. She called it an unapproved structural modification. That one lodged in me like a splinter, and it did not come out for the rest of this story. That afternoon, the Charger rolled up, loud low, sitting in front of my house like it owned the curb. Brantley climbed out, leaned on the hood of my scratch truck, and grinned. "Heard you've been asking around about me," he said. "You should be careful. My mom basically runs this neighborhood. She can make your life real hard, real fast." He nodded at my wall. "Nice paint job, by the way. Real improvement." He was confessing. In daylight. Because nobody in his entire life had ever made him afraid of a consequence, and he'd mistaken that for being untouchable. So I came down the steps nice and easy, and stopped about 4 feet from him, close enough to be polite. "You keyed the Hendersons too, and the Dunbars, and the Okonkwos. That's 4 households, which stacks the damages past the felony line in this state." I let it breathe. "And that word you sprayed on my wall, that pushes the whole thing into a bias crime enhancement. I know because I run financial and property crimes for the county. Lead detective, 9 years. I put out my hand friendly as a church greeter. Everett Blackwood. I don't think we've officially met. I have watched a lot of faces do a lot of things. I have never watched one do what Brantley's did right then. The grin didn't fall, it evaporated. The color went with it. His mouth opened and produced no sound. He froze mid-reach, hand halfway to mine like a man who'd stepped off a curb and only just heard the bus. "You're a cop." "Detective," I said. "There's a difference. Cops respond to the scene. I'm the one who takes it apart afterward." I smiled. Slowly. Property damage across multiple victims can aggregate past a felony threshold, and bias-motivated vandalism can carry a sentencing enhancement to the number of victims and the motive both matter. He got in the Charger without another word and left rubber on the pavement, pulling away the smell of scorched tire, hanging over the cul-de-sac like an exclamation point. Now this genre loves a moment like that. The freeze. The mic drop. The music swells and you cut to credits. But here's what I knew that Brantley didn't, that wasn't a win. It was almost a mistake. Because now he'd run home and tell his mother, and the comfortable, sloppy opponent I'd been so carefully cultivating was about to become a scared, connected one. And scared people who still feel powerful don't back down. They dig in. They call in favors. They get creative. Priscilla Thorne had 11 years of favors to call, and a rule book she treated like a loaded weapon. I'd just told her son I was pointing one back. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and started a list. Not of grievances, of assets. Because the fight I'd just picked wasn't going to be won loud. It was going to be won on paper, and I'd spent my whole career learning that paper never lies, as well as people think it does. It took Priscilla about 4 days to weaponize the only thing she'd ever really had, the rulebook. Suddenly, Wren Court was under siege by paperwork. Certified letters started stacking in my mailbox like she was trying to bury me in postage. My repainted mailbox post was the wrong shade of black. My garden hose coiled neatly on its hook was improperly stored equipment visible from the street. My doormat, I want to be very clear about this, got a written citation for unapproved seasonal messaging. It said, "Welcome," on a doormat. The woman fined me for hospitality. $300. Then $5, then $8. You could practically smell the desperation right along with the fresh mulch she had her crew laying down all over the common areas that week, busy, keeping up appearances while her world quietly started to tilt. The wet earth smell of it drifted down the block on the afternoon breeze, while my fine notices piled up on the counter like losing lottery tickets. Then she got clever. She called an emergency board meeting, a Tuesday at 2 p.m., when working people can't attend, which was of course the entire point, and rammed through a brand new rule: no aftermarket security cameras facing common areas or neighboring property, citing resident privacy. Gee, wonder who that was for. 48 hours to remove mine or eat $100 a day fine. I didn't even have a camera up yet. She was banning the future. That's how I knew Brantley had gone home and talked. I went to that meeting, by the way. Sat in the back of the half-empty clubhouse while Priscilla ran it like a woman gaveling through a coronation. No real discussion, no real vote, just her voice and a room full of people too tired or too scared to push back. The air conditioning was broken and the whole place smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. She looked at me exactly once, a little smirk like she'd already won. Here's where a normal person breaks. The fines alone were pushing 4 figures a month. She had the newsletter, the board, the bylaws, and the momentum. She was doing the thing petty tyrants do best, making the cost of resistance higher than the cost of surrender, one certified letter at a time. So I did the most aggressive thing I could think of. I paid every single fine. On time. In full. With a smile that must have driven her up a wall. Because a fine you refuse to pay is a fight, it's a lien, a hearing, a mess. She'd win because she wrote the rules. But a fine you pay is a receipt. And I was not collecting fights. I was collecting receipts. Every check I photocopied, every certified letter I filed by date in a 3-ring binder, Simone started calling the divorce binder until she saw what was actually going in it. And then I did the boring, beautiful thing that actually wins. I built a spreadsheet. Every fine issued in Cedar Hollow that year cross-referenced against every property on the association roll, and a shape rose up out of those numbers, the way a face rises out of a crowd once you know exactly who you're looking for. The fines weren't random. They weren't even really about the rules. The Petersons' boat had sat on a trailer in their driveway for 2 solid years, not a nickel. The Kowalskis' dead brown lawn and storm gray fence, nothing. Old man Gus, God love him, hadn't edged his grass since the Obama administration, untouched. But the 3 newest families on the block, the 3 families that didn't quite match the Cedar Hollow brochure from 1994, between me, the Okonkwo's, and the Hendersons, we'd been fined a combined $11,000 in 18 months. That's not enforcement, that's a filter. A rule invented to target one homeowner, or fines applied to some houses and not others for the same violation, can be challenged and voided as selective enforcement. The problem was proving intent. On paper, Priscilla could always claim she just hadn't gotten to the Petersons' boat yet. She controlled the official records, and the official records said whatever she needed them to say. I had a pattern. I needed a smoking gun, which is when Odette Vance found me at the community mailboxes, dusk coming down purple over the rooftops, the crickets just starting to tune up in the hedges. You're the detective. Not a question. Word travels. She glanced around like a woman handing off contraband in a parking garage. "She keeps 2 sets of minutes," Odette said quietly. "The ones she reads out loud at meetings, and the real ones, the actual votes, the fine schedules, the money. I'm the board secretary, I type both. 11 years I've typed both." Her jaw tightened until the cords stood out in her neck. "My husband always told me to leave it alone, keep my head down. My husband passed in March." She pressed a thumb drive into my palm, small and warm from her hand. "She fined the Okonkwo's $600 for a ramp their little girl needs to get through her own front door. A ramp! I'm done being quiet, detective. Do something with this." That thumb drive was gold. It was also gasoline, and I wasn't ready to strike a match near it. Because a whistleblower's drive proves motive. But I needed something that turned mean fines into an actual crime. The kind with a statute number and a cell at the end of it. So I plugged it in that night. Simone made tea. And around 1 in the morning, she stopped scrolling, put one finger on the laptop screen, and went very, very still. "Everett," she said slowly. "Who or what is TCE? Let me explain what we were looking at, because this is the part where the whole thing turned over like a truck on black ice. An HOA collects dues from every homeowner. Some of it runs the neighborhood mowing the pool, the streetlights, that mulch she loved so much. But a big chunk, by law, goes into a reserve fund, the community's savings account, for the expensive stuff down the road. A new roof on the clubhouse, repaving the streets, emergencies. It is not the president's money. It is not the board's money. It's everyone's held in trust like a church collection plate nobody's supposed to reach into. And TCE was all over Odette's real minutes. A transfer here, $12,000. Landscaping consultation vendor, TCE LLC. A transfer there, $9,000. Aesthetic compliance consulting, TCE LLC. Another $15,000. Reserve study, TCE LLC. 4 years of them buried in meetings that the public minutes recorded as routine maintenance approvals. I ran the company the next morning, over a coffee that went cold while I read, because they always do. TCE LLC, Thorne Consulting Enterprises. And there, on the state business registration, plain as a signed confession, registered agent Priscilla Thorne. She wasn't just petty, she was stealing. She'd built herself a shell company, billed her own HOA for consulting that never happened, voted to approve the payments at meetings she alone controlled, and funneled the money straight into her own pocket. Added up across 4 years, and it cleared $163,000, skimmed out of the savings account of the very neighbors she was fining into silence. She was fining the Okonkwo's $600 for a ramp with one hand, and writing herself $15,000 checks with the other. An HOA reserve fund is money held in trust for all owners. Routing it to a board member's own private company is embezzlement, not a consulting fee. Now, here's the flip. This is the part I want you to sit with. For months, I'd been on defense. Fined, painted, mocked, keyed out, papered by a rule book, and a woman who smirked at me across a clubhouse. Priscilla thought she was grinding me down. She thought every certified letter was another shovelful of dirt on my grave. She had no idea that every fine she wrote had been funding my case. Every letter established the pattern. Every rigged meeting Odette recorded. Every dollar I paid with a smile I photocopied. And now I had all 3 legs of the stool: the motive, the mechanism, and the money. The power hadn't shifted. It had inverted. And she didn't know it, which was, without question, the single most valuable thing I owned. An opponent who's certain she's winning keeps playing the exact same hand over and over, right into the trap. Simone, ever the scientist, asked the one right question. So why not just arrest her? You've got it all right there. Fair. And here's the answer, because it matters, and because a lot of good cases die exactly here. I couldn't not clean. Half my evidence came from a whistleblower's thumb drive, and any halfway awake defense attorney would spend a year trying to get it thrown out as improperly obtained, tainting everything it touched. I needed the HOA's official books, the real bank statements produced through the front door, to independently show the exact same thing Odette's minutes did. I needed the crime to prove itself out of Priscilla's own records handed over with her own hands. And the law, bless, it hands you the key. In our state, like in most, every single homeowner has a statutory right to inspect the HOA's financial records, bank statements, ledgers, vendor invoices, board minutes. You send a formal written demand, and the board has a legally defined window to produce them or start racking up penalties. Priscilla could not say no. Stonewall me, and that's its own violation, plus it screams guilt. Comply, and she hands me a forensic trail with her name on every page. As a homeowner, you can send a formal written demand to inspect your HOA's financial records, and the board is legally required to produce them within a set window. So that's what Simone and I drafted at the kitchen table that night: polite, procedural, deliberately boring. Certified mail, because if there was one thing Priscilla Thorne respected, it was certified mail. I pictured her opening it, the little flick of annoyance. She'd read it as a bluff, the flailing of a man drowning in her fines, grabbing at anything. She'd produce the records just to shut me up and prove she could. And somewhere in those records, in her own careful bookkeeping, sat $163,000 wearing a fake name. I mailed it Monday morning. Then I went to work on the trap. Now for the fun part, and I want to be crystal clear because this genre absolutely loves a spring-loaded death machine bolted under a porch step. A trap doesn't hurt anybody. It doesn't need to. The whole art of it is that the other guy walks in of his own free will in public and does the incriminating thing all by himself, right where the light can find him. Here was the design. Peace won the bait. Brantley could not resist my wall. It was the one canvas in the world that made him feel powerful, and powerful was the only thing that boy had ever been handed. So I gave him a reason to come back. I let it slip to the single chattiest neighbor on the block, you know the type, a human newsletter that I'd finally given up, sanded the slur off and repainted the whole wall a fresh, gleaming, brilliant white. 3 days before the Cedar Hollow Fall Festival, when the entire town would parade right past it on the way to the common green. For a guy like Brantley, a clean white wall 3 days before the whole town shows up isn't a wall. It's a dare with a bow on it. Peace to the mark. This is where Simone earned her whole year's salary. There's a product you can buy online for about $30, anti-theft UV security marking dye, sometimes sold as smart water or invisible security paint. You brush it onto whatever you want to protect. It's completely colorless and visible in daylight, and it will not wash off skin for the better part of a week. But hold a black light to it, and it glows like a struck match in a dark room. Simone, chemistry teacher that she is, mixed a batch and painted it into the top course of that pretty white wall and along the brick right at hand height, exactly where a tall, lazy, right-handed vandal would brace himself. Invisible, patient, waiting like a landmine made of light. UV anti-theft marking dye is cheap, legal, invisible in daylight, and glows under blacklight for days. It silently marks anyone who touches the protected surface. Piece 3, the eyes. 2 trail cameras this time. The $40 kind deer hunters strapped to trees. Motion-activated infrared, date and time stamped on every frame. I mounted one in the crook of my maple, where the branches swallow it, and set the second on Gus's porch, angled down the property line so the wall was covered from 2 directions at once. Because a trap without a recording is just a story. And stories, as any detective will tell you, do not hold up in court. Record from at least 2 angles. 1 camera can be argued with in court. 2 corroborating time-stamped angles are very hard to challenge. Then came the people. Because a plan is only ever as strong as the folks willing to stand next to you when it finally goes off. Gus Halloran turned out to be a lot more than a witness. He'd retired from the county survey office, and he still had access to the plat maps, and when he pulled mine and unrolled it across my kitchen table, he grinned that dangerous grin again, the reading glasses sliding down his nose. My wall and fence, the ones Priscilla had fined as non-compliant and then blamed for their own vandalism, sat a full 8 inches inside my legal property line, precisely where the original approval put them decades ago. Every fine she'd ever tied to them was fraudulent on its face. Gus offered to restake my corners at dawn and sign a sworn affidavit his hands steady as a carpenter's level, even at 71. A licensed survey and the official plat map can prove a fence or wall is compliant and inside your property line. And a plat map beats an HOA president's opinion every day of the week. Odette Vance, kept feeding me the real minutes as Priscilla, panicking, now passed more and more targeted rules, and dug herself deeper with every rigged meeting. Every gavel was another exhibit. Dennis Klatt, the HOA treasurer, was the wobbly domino. Dennis wasn't a crook. He was a coward, a nice enough retiree who'd signed off on Priscilla's consulting checks for years, because asking questions was harder than not asking them. I paid him a quiet visit one evening. I didn't threaten him. I didn't have to. I just laid 3 TCE invoices on his kitchen table, side by side, and let the silence do the explaining. That this train was leaving the station with him or without him, and that a man who cooperates with the lead detective rides in a very different car than the man who co-signed the fraud. Dennis went the color of his own Formica countertop. He agreed to bring the official bank statements the second Priscilla produced them. In an embezzlement scheme, the terrified bookkeeper who just signed what he was told is almost always the first one to flip. And finally, the Cedar County Ledger reporter who'd been chasing an HOA abuse story for years and never once gotten a soul to go on record. I gave her exactly one thing: a date, a time, and a place. The Fall Festival, the Common Green, 2 o'clock sharp. Bring a photographer, I told her, a good one, and maybe don't schedule anything for after. Simone stood in our kitchen the night before it all came together, looking at the black light charging on the counter, its little violet bulb humming to itself in the dark. "You nervous?" "No," I said. And I meant every letter of it. I've already read the ending. She just hasn't gotten there yet. Priscilla got my records demand on a Wednesday. I know because Odette told me her face went the color of skim milk right there at the mailbox. Her first move was to ignore it. So the statutory clock started ticking, and every single day she stalled was another penalty stacking up and another exhibit dropping into what I was privately calling the consciousness of guilt file. I let it run. Silence had always been my best weapon in this whole thing, and she just kept handing it to me gift-wrapped. Her second move was to fight the war she actually understood: reputation. The Cedar Hollow newsletter, Priscilla's personal Pravda printed on cardstock she probably billed to the reserve fund, ran a front-page item about concerning aggressive behavior from a resident currently under board review, heavy on the implication that I was the dangerous one. She worked the pool deck like a campaign, whispering to the sunbathers that I was obsessive, that I'd been harassing poor Brantley, that Simone and I weren't really Cedar Hollow people. She rallied the 4 or 5 neighbors who still owed her favors, and just like that, Simone started getting the cold shoulder at the mailboxes, backs turning like a slow tide going out, conversations dropping to nothing when she walked up. That one got to Simone more than she let on. I found her at the kitchen sink one night, scrubbing a pan that was already clean. Jaw set. "I taught half these people's kids chemistry," she said quietly, "and now they won't say good morning." I dried the pan she handed me and told her the truth. Give it 2 weeks. They're not turning their backs on us. They're turning them on her. They just don't know it yet. Because here's the thing about a smear campaign. It only works on people who don't already know the truth. And I had spent months quietly, patiently making sure the right people knew exactly what was happening. The Okonkwo's, Gus, Odette, Dennis, every family that had been quietly filtered by those fines. Priscilla was out there building a coalition of 5 loud people. I'd been building a coalition of 30 silent ones, one kept receipt at a time. Then she escalated to the move that finally made me smile all the way back to my molars. She tried to buy me. She sent poor, sweating Dennis over one evening, the air thick with charcoal smoke from somebody's grill down the block, the first real bite of fall riding underneath it. He stood on my porch and delivered his offer like a hostage reading a statement off a card he was afraid to look up from. If I would just drop this whole unfortunate misunderstanding and formally withdraw my records demand, the HOA was prepared to waive every outstanding fine and reimburse in full every fine I'd already paid. $11,000. Back in my pocket. No questions asked, no records reviewed. I let him get all the way to the end. Then I said, "Dennis, real quick, is she recording this?" He blinked. "What, no?" "No, of course not." "Good," I said, "because I am." I nodded at the doorbell camera glowing over his left shoulder. "So let's make sure I've got the offer straight for the tape. The HOA, which has spent 6 months swearing every one of these fines was valid, mandatory, and non-negotiable, is now offering to refund all $11,000 of them the very week I asked to see the books, in exchange for me not seeing the books. Do I have that right? Dennis's soul left his body a little bit right there, on my welcome mat. The one Priscilla fined me for. An offer to suddenly waive fines the moment you ask for financial records is an admission the fines were never really about the rules. And in a one-party consent state, you can lawfully record that conversation. That bribe captured clean on my own front porch was worth more than every fine receipt in the divorce binder combined. Because a person defending legitimate, valid fines does not offer to erase all of them the instant you reach for the ledger. That's not the behavior of the innocent. That is the behavior of a woman scrambling to buy back a book she already knows will hang her. I told Dennis gently to go on home, and to bring the official bank statements to the festival like we'd agreed, or to make sure he was somewhere very far away when it started. He chose the statements. Smart Dennis. Meanwhile, Brantley was coming apart at the seams. Gus reported the gray Charger creeping past my house at night, headlights off, slowing to a crawl at the wall, then gunning it away. The kid was a moth, and I just hung a fresh, gleaming white porch light, 3 days before the whole town was due to show up. He'd heard about the new paint from the Human newsletter, same as everyone. He wanted to hit it so bad it was eating him alive, and he was terrified because the last time he'd seen me, I'd recited the felony statute to him from memory in my own driveway. Fear plus ego is the most predictable chemical reaction there is. Simone could have balanced the equation on her classroom whiteboard in her sleep. He'd tell himself he was too smart to get caught. He'd tell himself I'd been bluffing about the cameras. He'd tell himself that one more hit, one really good one right before the festival, would prove to his mother and to himself that the Thorns still ran this block. He'd come, in the dark, right before the festival. And the wall would be waiting for him, glowing its silent, invisible truth watched from 2 angles. Patient as a held breath. He came the night before the festival. Of course he did. 11:43 p.m. Gus, who I am now convinced does not sleep at all, texted me a single word from his dark porch. Charger. I didn't get up. I didn't go to the window. I didn't even reach for my phone again. I lay in bed next to Simone and listened to the faint, familiar hiss of an industrial paint sprayer carrying across the quiet street through the open window, and I felt something I hadn't felt in an entire year. Peace. Because I already knew down to the frame what those cameras were catching. I knew the invisible dye was going tacky on his fingers right then, working its way under his nails, soaking into the cuffs of his hoodie. I knew that at that exact moment in the dark, feeling powerful and clever and safe, Brantley Thorn was carefully painting himself into the dead center of my case with a brush he could not even see. In the morning, I walked out with my coffee cold again. Some habits are load-bearing. And there it was, another slur. Orange over the fresh white this time, ugly as ever, still tacky at the edges. The sharp, chemical stink of it hanging in the cool dawn air. And I felt nothing at all but calm because the wall had done exactly the job I'd built it to do. I photographed it wide and tight. I checked both cameras crisp. Date stamped his face, clear as high noon, in the eerie green infrared glow, the industrial sprayer plain as a signature in his right hand. And then I did the last careful thing, the thing that mattered most. I didn't clean it. I left the paint. I left the message. I wanted the whole town to walk past it that afternoon and see in the honest light of day exactly what Cedar Hollow's proud first family had been doing to its neighbors in the dark. The scene was my closing argument, and you do not wipe down your closing argument the morning you deliver it. Then I got ready. I want to describe the next few hours because they were the quietest of my life, and I think the most important. I made 3 complete copies of everything: the vandalism footage from both angles, the official bank records, Odette's real minutes, Gus's survey and affidavit, the porch camera bribe, the state filing with Priscilla's name printed under registered agent. 1 copy went to my captain. 1 copy sealed in a manila envelope I hand-delivered that very morning to the district attorney's office downtown, with a cover memo I'd been quietly writing in my head for a solid month. And 1 copy went into a plain folder that I tucked under my arm. I charged the black light, and tested it on a scrap of dyed wood out in the garage. The violet bulb hummed to life, and the dye lit up like a struck match. Ready. Simone ironed my good shirt without being asked, the steam smell filling the kitchen. Gus restaked my property corners at dawn and signed his affidavit at my table, his hands steady as a level. Odette came by with the real minutes printed, 3-hole punched, tabbed, and highlighted like a woman who had been waiting 11 years to be believed. Dennis called, his voice shaking so hard I could barely make out the words, to say he had the official bank statements locked in his car, and he'd be there. God help him, he would be there. And Marla texted a single line, photographer confirmed front row. Every domino standing, every card face down and waiting on the table. And 2 blocks away, Priscilla Thorne was cheerfully getting ready for her favorite day of the entire year. Because here's the beautiful, terrible irony of the whole thing. The Cedar Hollow Fall Festival was Priscilla's festival, her pride, her stage. Every single year she stood at the little podium on the common green in front of the whole town, and the county councilmen and the church ladies and the kids with painted faces and orange balloons, and she gave a speech about community standards and the Cedar Hollow way. And everyone clapped every year because in Cedar Hollow you clapped for Priscilla or you found a fresh fine in your mailbox on Monday. She had chosen the stage, she had built it with her own hands, tuned the microphone herself, and personally invited the press. She thought that morning that it was going to be her coronation. I just had to show up and let her hand me the mic. I loaded the folder, the laptop, the blacklight, and 1 long orange extension cord into a canvas grocery bag. Simone took my hand at the door. You okay? I looked out at the street one more time, the maples going gold, the festival tents already rising. 2 blocks down on the green, the smell of kettle corn and fried dough drifting in on the warm wind. Whole families walking down the middle of the road with folding lawn chairs under their arms. A perfect, golden, all-American autumn afternoon. 2 blocks away, my wall sat glowing its silent, invisible truth in the sun, waiting for 1 black light. I've been okay for a month, I told her. Today's just the part where everybody else finds out. And we walked to the festival together. The common green was packed. String lights zigzagged between the oaks. Hay bales lined the walkways, and a bluegrass band was cheerfully murdering a Johnny Cash cover near the gazebo. The sizzle and grease smell of the funnel cake stand hung thick and sweet in the warm afternoon air. Kids darted through the crowd with orange balloons tied to their wrists. The county councilman, Ray Ostrander, worked the tent line in a blazer, shaking every hand he could reach. And Marla Prentice stood near the front with her photographer, exactly where I had asked her to be. At 2 o'clock, on the dot, Priscilla took the podium. She looked magnificent, and I mean that as an insult. Cream pantsuit, the expensive sunglasses pushed up into her hair like a tiara, the microphone already tuned perfectly to her voice, because she had, of course, tuned it herself. She tapped it twice. A whine of feedback rolled across the green, and the crowd went quiet and dutiful. Welcome, she purred, to another year of the Cedar Hollow we all love. A community that works, that thrives, because we hold one another to a standard. Polite, practiced applause. While it rippled, I set my grocery bag down at the edge of the low stage, ran the orange extension cord over to the sound booth's power strip, and quietly plugged my laptop into the little projector the festival committee used every year for the raffle drawing. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even looked twice. I had a folder, a calm face, and a shirt Simone had ironed. I looked like a man who belonged up there. I did belong up there. And when certain elements in our community refused to respect that standard. Priscilla went on warming to it now, her eyes sweeping the crowd and snagging on me at the edge of the stage, narrowing just slightly. The rest of us are the ones who pay the price. Now, I know some of you have heard about the recent unpleasantness over on Wren Court. I'd love to talk about the unpleasantness on Wren Court, I said. I hadn't shouted. I have a voice that carries when I want it to. Every head on that green turned at once. You always end with community questions, ma'am. I stepped up onto the low stage unhurried and held out one hand for the microphone, the way you'd politely ask a driver to see their license. I've got one. May I? She should have said no. Every instinct she had was screaming it. But 200 neighbors, a county councilman, and a newspaper photographer were all watching, and Priscilla Thorne had never once, in 11 years, allowed herself to be seen refusing the appearance of graciousness. So she handed me the microphone with a smile like a fresh paper cut. I've thought a lot about that smile in the time since. It was the last one she ever gave in that town. "My name's Everett Blackwood," I said to the green. "Some of you know me. Mrs. Thorne knows me. When I moved in, she thought I was the lawn crew." A nervous ripple of laughter moved through the hay bales. "I want to show all of you something. It'll just take a second." I turned on the projector. 10 feet tall on the committee's raffle screen for the entire town to see at once, grainy green infrared footage, time-stamped 11:47 the night before, a young man in a hoodie, dragging a slur across a clean white wall with an industrial sprayer. Then the second camera angle from Gus's porch. Then his face turning toward the maple for just a moment, clear as noon lit up in the camera's glow. The green went dead silent. Even the bluegrass band put down their instruments. "That was last night," I said quietly, and the quiet carried further than any shout. "That's my wall, and that word I won't repeat, and there are children here, has now gone up on my property 4 separate times." I found Brantley in the crowd, frozen mid-bite over a paper boat of funnel cake near the stand. "Brantley, do me one favor, son, hold up your hands." He didn't. He was already shaking his head, backing slowly into a hay bale, like it might hide him. So I stepped down off the stage and walked toward him through a crowd that parted in front of me like water, and I raised the blacklight in my hand. "This," I announced, loud enough for the back of the green, "is UV security dye. It's been painted on that wall for 3 days, invisible in daylight, doesn't wash off skin for a week, and right now it is all over the hands of whoever put paint on my wall last night." I clicked the violet bulb on and swept it across his hands. They lit up, both of them, glowing a bright, unmistakable electric purple, his palms, every finger, the cuffs of the exact same hoodie from the footage on the screen behind me. 200 people gasped at the same instant. Marla's photographer opened up like a machine gun, the shutter chattering. Brantley Thorne stood in the dead center of the Cedar Hollow Fall Festival with his crime glowing on his own 2 hands for the whole town to see. "That's the vandalism," I said, turning and walking calmly back toward the podium. "But honestly, folks, that's the small stuff. Let's talk about the money." Click. The screen changed. The TCE invoices, the reserve fund transfers, the state filing. Every one of you pays dues into a reserve fund. Your money. Held in trust for this whole community. And for 4 years, your HOA president has quietly paid $163,000 of it to a consulting company called TCE. Click, and Priscilla's own name filled the screen, 10 feet tall, under the words, "Registered Agent." TCE is Priscilla Thorne. She has been paying herself out of your savings account and writing landscaping in the ledger. Priscilla lunged for the microphone. "That's it, slander. This is a private association matter. He has no right. He has no authority." "I've got every bit of authority." I turned and faced her, and I gave her the sentence I had been holding in my mouth since the afternoon she planted a finger in my chest and called me sweetheart. "I'm the lead detective for this county's financial and property crimes unit, 9 years running it." I watched the color pour out of her face, the exact same shade that had drained out of her son's an hour and a lifetime ago. "And I hand-delivered this entire file, the footage, the bank records, your son, and the $11,000 in fraudulent fines you sent a man to my porch to bribe me with, which I also have on tape, to the district attorney's office this morning." I set the microphone down on the podium. Gently, deliberately. The exact way she had once a lifetime ago shut a door in my face. Out on Maple, 2 Cedar County Sheriff's cruisers were already rolling quietly up toward the green. No lights, no siren, in no particular hurry at all. They didn't cuff Priscilla on the green. Financial cases don't work the way the movies tell you. The arrest came 3 weeks later, quiet at her own front door, after the DA's forensic accountant confirmed on paper what her own records had already screamed out loud. Embezzlement, fraud, a stack of counts I won't bore you with. Brantley got charged too, of course. The vandalism, the aggregated property damage across the whole block, and the bias enhancement I'd promised him. calm as Sunday in my own driveway. Last I heard, Priscilla took a plea to avoid a trial she knew she couldn't win. Full restitution, a felony record, and a permanent bar from ever sitting on an HOA board again, anywhere in this state. Brantley did 90 days, a mountain of community service, and had to write by hand an apology to every single family whose car he keyed and every wall he ever decorated. The Okonkwo's framed theirs and hung it in the hallway. I think that's funny. I've decided after everything that I'm allowed to think that's funny. But here's the part I actually care about. The part that made all the paperwork worth it. That $163,000 came back. Every cent of the restitution flowed straight into the reserve fund it had been stolen from, and for the first time in a decade, Cedar Hollow had real savings sitting in the bank. We held a special election, a real one, on a Saturday afternoon when working people could actually show up and raise their hands. Priscilla's rigged bylaws got torn out by the root. Odette Vance is the president now, and she reads one set of minutes out loud in the daylight. Gus runs the architectural committee, which mostly means he tells nervous people their fences are fine and to go home and enjoy their weekend. And Dennis kept the books, and to his enormous and lasting credit, finally at 63 years old, learned how to say the word no. And we did something with the interest that recovered funds started throwing off. It was Simone's idea, actually, over coffee one morning. We started the Cedar Hollow Neighbors Scholarship, a few $1,000s a year, awarded to a local kid headed off to college or trade school, no matter what they look like or how long their family's been on the block. The very first one went to Ada Okonkwo, the little girl whose wheelchair ramp Priscilla once fined her family $600 to build. Ada's studying civil engineering now. She says she wants to design accessible public spaces so that no kid ever has to be told a ramp to her own front door is an unapproved structural modification. You genuinely cannot write it better than that. I've tried. The festival's still going strong too, bigger every year. We renamed it Neighbors Day, and there's no podium speech about standards anymore. Just kettle corn and bluegrass and a whole lot of people who used to be too scared to make eye contact at the mailbox, now dragging their folding lawn chairs into one big crooked circle on the green, like they should have been doing all along. The smell of funnel cake still hangs over that grass every single fall. I've made my peace with it. And my wall? I finally repainted it myself one quiet Sunday. Same brick, sealed clear, no white bait coat this time. Grandfathered compliant 8 inches inside my own property line, right where it stood for decades. Nobody has laid a finger on it since. Funny how that works once a neighborhood remembers whose side the law is actually on. Simone asked me one night out on the porch, with the crickets going, whether I felt like I'd finally won. I thought about it a while. And I told her the honest truth. I didn't win anything. I just did the boring thing over and over and over until the paperwork confessed. I kept my head when they wanted me hot. I paid the fine and I kept the receipt. And I let a very comfortable woman stay comfortable right up until the second the black light came on. Play stupid games, folks. Win stupid prizes. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, I've got another story coming your way. There's a real estate developer 2 towns over who tried to take an 84-year-old widow's land right out from under her, using a surveying error, not knowing her late husband had buried one very specific easement document in a safe deposit box 30 years ago. That one's got a courtroom in it and a judge who does not suffer fools. I'll tell it next week. Until then, 2 quick things and then I'll let you go. Drop your own HOA nightmare down in the comments. The pettier, the better. Honestly, some of the stories you people leave make Priscilla Thorne look downright reasonable, and I want to read every single word of it. And if you like watching the little guy read the fine print until the bully runs clean out of moves, do me a favor and subscribe, because somewhere out there, somebody in your neighborhood is measuring your grass with a ruler right now. And one of these days, it's going to be your turn to smile, nod real polite, and start collecting receipts. I'll see you next week. So that's how it ended. Not with a shouting match, not with a fist fight on the lawn. It ended with a blacklight, a folder of paperwork, and $163,000 that finally found its way back home. Sit with that for a second. Everett Blackwood never once raised his voice. Here's what I keep coming back to. Priscilla Thorne had the newsletter, the board read out the bylaws, and 11 years of everybody being too scared to say a word. She had all the power in that neighborhood. And she lost anyway because Everett understood something she never did. Here's what I keep coming back to. Priscilla Thorne had the newsletter, the board, the bylaws, and 11 years of everybody being too scared to say a word. She had all the power in that neighborhood. And she lost anyway because Everett understood something she never did. Power that runs on fear only works until one person stops being afraid and starts keeping receipts. He didn't beat her by being louder. He beat her by being patient. He paid every unfair fine on purpose and photocopied every single one. He read the fine print in a closing packet 2 owners deep. He let a comfortable person stay comfortable right up until the moment the lights came on. That's not luck. That's preparation quietly outlasting arrogance. The $11,000 in bogus fines she tried to hand back. That became the confession. Because nobody refunds money they believe they were owed. And I know somebody watching this is living a smaller version of it right now. Maybe it's a letter taped to your door over the wrong shade of mailbox paint. Maybe it's a fine that feels less like a rule and more like a message. You don't need a badge like Everett's to fight back. You need your documents a paper trail and the patience to let the other side overreach. So let me ask you straight, what would you have done? Paid it quietly to keep the peace? Or started building your own binder? Tell me in the comments. I read them. If a good patient man, outthinking a petty tyrant is your kind of story, do 2 things for me. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you, and drop your own HOA nightmare below. The pettier, the better. Next week, it gets bigger. A developer tries to take an 84-year-old widow's land through a surveying error, not knowing her late husband buried one document that changes everything. Because in the end, the loudest person in the room almost never wins. The most prepared one does. I'll see you next week.